Welcome to the 229th episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Rutherford. Stay tuned for my interview with New York Times bestselling author Ace Atkins. Ace's latest novel, The Sinners, is the latest novel in the Quinn Coulson series. Stay tuned for my interview with Ace Atkins. Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Ace Atkins, New York Times bestselling author of the Quinn Coulson novels. The first two Quinn Coulson novels, The Ranger and The Lost Ones, were nominated for the Edgar Award for Best Novel. And he also has a third Edgar nomination for his short story, Last Fair Deal Gone Down. Atkins' latest Quinn Coulson novel, The Sinners, has just been published. Ace, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. Good to be here.
Sure. Well, if someone listening hasn't heard about The Sinners yet, how would you describe your new novel?
I think, the books I write they're obviously crime novels and very character-based and also a lot of the deep South thrown in. So, I think that, I come from a world of not only loving crime novels, but also loving Southern lit. But I think that the characters really are the key for me. So this book, the whole genesis of it was the idea behind this family called the Pritchard family, which was in my novels is a kind of a legendary outlaw group that's in North Mississippi. And I wanted to write a book about these guys, particularly about their patriarch, a real unsavory character named Heath Pritchard, who's been released after 20 years in prison. And when he comes home, all hell breaks loose. And that's where the story begins with The Sinners. It's about this group trying to hold on to the last days of their empire.
Sure. If someone, do you remember the original idea that led you to writing The Sinners?
I think, one of the things I wanted to write about, there was a famous case involving a legendary marijuana farmer here, went back 30 years ago. That was in an area here called Calhoun County, Mississippi. And the guy was growing a gigantic amount of weed here, like just massive amounts. And he finally got caught through the DEA and the local authorities and that kind of stuff. And I was always just fascinated about this empire that he had been running, basically, trucking a lot of that stuff up to Memphis, which is about, an hour from where he would have been. And the idea of this local kingpin farmer, weed grower, in small town America, I thought was just fantastic. So I think that was really the original idea for the Sinners.
And I know a lot of writers who write series characters get asked this question, but I am curious, how much of yourself is in Quinn Coulson?
I have to tell you, probably not a lot. I think that one of the things, I've written a series character before that was kind of a character that was a little bit like me and had things in there. And of course, a lot of people try to do the idealized version of themselves, where they're a little bit taller and a bit faster or whatever than yourself. But, I kind of was bored with that idea. And I really wrote a character who really isn't like me at all. I mean, Quinn is a pretty straight ahead, hard as nails, ex-army guy. He's not a, superhero or a super soldier or anything like that, but he's a very regimented person. I mean, Quinn's the kind of guy that gets up at 5:30 in the morning and jogs, 5 miles, comes back in, makes a pot of coffee, starts his day. I mean, that is not me at all. I could not keep up with Quinn. I could not keep up with that regimented lifestyle. I mean, he's, nitpicking, very detailed, all that kind of stuff. But I do know people like Quinn. And, I guess I really know more Quinn than I am Heath Pritchard or some of the other guys that I get into their heads about. But I found Quinn to be the perfect, hero for this series.
Gotcha. Well, I know that you live in Oxford, Mississippi, and you played football at Auburn University, yet you were chosen to continue writing the Spencer novels, the character created by Robert B. Parker. How did you get the job writing Spencer?
Well, I guess it started, coming up on, nearly 10 years ago. I had been with my publisher, now my longtime publisher, Putnam, for a few years, and they had asked me to create a new series. And at the time, I was writing books that were based on true crimes. I did a book about Machine Gun Kelly called Infamous. I did another book that was set in the 1920s about the Fatty Arbuckle scandal, movie scandal of the 1920s. And So I was asked by my editor, my long-term time editor, if I would create a new series. We went back and forth on what that idea was going to be. And, I just written a book called The Ranger. That was the first of the Quinn Coulson books. And I think the publisher at the time saw something in these books, even though they were set in the Deep South and very Southern-type books, that had a similar thread, a similar feel to what Robert Parker was doing. And I think that Parker is somebody who I greatly admired, but we came from the same place. We came from the world of classic detective fiction with Chandler and Hammett, but also the Old West and Western literature and Western film. And so I think that the publisher saw something that was similar, and I was asked to create 50 pages of what my idea for the next Spencer book was going to be. I really don't know how many other people did it. I'm not sure about how that went, but I do know that, a few months later, I got a phone call from Parker's longtime editor, a woman named Chris Pepe, and she said that she and Parker's longtime agent and his wife, Joan Parker, had all been unanimously chosen my pages, and they said, just keep on writing. I said, what do you want me to do? They said, we love the 50 pages, keep on writing, and that became the book Lullaby, and I've been writing Spencer ever since.
And so, given that, and the fact that you live in Oxford, do you visit Boston much or read the Boston Globe every day to get ideas and a feel for the city?
Yeah, I do read the Boston Globe, but yeah, no, I'm in Boston frequently. It's a pretty easy trip. I live not too far from Memphis, and it's pretty easy to get up to Boston. And over the last 8 to 10 years, I've spent an enormous amount of time in Boston. I've got now many friends in Boston. I've got friends in the Boston Fire Department. I've got friends that work in all, Spencer's favorite world, which is the restaurant business. People have been very welcoming to me up there, and they love that character so much. And he's a nationally known iconic detective, but in Boston, he's really their hero. He's so well known, and so that has opened up a lot of doors. And so I spend a lot of time up there.
And I'm curious, did you ever look at any ideas or fragments from Parker, or is this all just original plots and ideas?
No, that's a good question that I rarely get asked. But when the first things that happened, Parker was somebody who I really idolized, and really how I got into telling the kind of books. There would be no Quinn Coulson if there wasn't Robert B. Parker. I mean, Robert B. Parker influenced me tremendously. And one of the first things I did is I flew up to Boston and had dinner with Joan Parker. And the next day she invited me to come over to their house, and we sat in Bob's office. That it was exactly the way that Bob it had been while he had been living. It had not changed. And we were there, and she asked me if I would like to sit in the chair, and I told her that I couldn't sit in Bob's chair, but I said, we'll sit in the room and talk. And so Joan sat in Bob's chair, and that was the first question I had for her. I said, what about his notes and his ideas of what he was going to be doing next? And she showed me his file cabinet, and Bob was a very meticulous, very orderly guy. Nothing. There was nothing. She said if Bob sat down to write a book, he finished it. And, I think he was, very briefly working on a book when he passed away. I don't only think he had a page left of that. And, but as far as any ideas for future books or discarded manuscripts or anything, there was absolutely nothing. So that book, Lullaby, really was just, it was just the idea. And I was a fan, so there wasn't really any prep work. When I was asked to write some Spencer stuff, they said, do you want us to, the publisher said, can we send you Bob's backlist to get you familiar with his writing style? And I said, geez, no, you're kidding. I said, I read all of his books. I said, I've been a fan since I was a teenager. So I was able to just start writing. I said, what's the next Spencer book going to be? What is it about? And how's it going to feel? And so that's how Lullaby came about.
Great. So what's the writing process like for you? Did you write an extensive outline for the Sinners?
I wish I had. I wish I had an extensive outline for the Sinners. I think with the Quinn books, I kind of have a more of a clear view, I think, with Spencer, because it is a detective story and it's only from Spencer's point of view. And so I kind of have a little bit more of a framework when I'm starting on a Spencer book. Quinn book is really about these characters. And, I think in some ways, for the people who read the series, they know, Quinn Coulson is not a Quinn Coulson novel like it is a Spencer novel. Quinn is one of the characters, but he shares equal part of the stage with, the Pritchard family and some members of his own family, like his sister Caddy and his best friend Boom, who in this particular book is, working with some shadowy characters in this, illegal truck driving operation. And so they're really sharing equal weight and equal point of views from all these different people. So in that, and that much being said, I really start off with characters. Is who is this book about? It's this particular book is about Quinn. In this book, he's getting married and he's, looking to have a comfortable few weeks in peace and quiet, which he doesn't get because Heath Pritchard gets out of jail. It's also about the Pritchard brothers and their weed growing empire and their fascination with dirt track racing in the South. And it's also about Quinn's best friend Boom, who's taken on this job that he loves, which is long haul truck driving, and finding this new way of life. And he's an injured veteran, and he's finding this freedom he hasn't had for a while, but then he's finding out he's doing some illegal things that he didn't know about. So it's writing about all these characters, and to get into it, I really have to spend time with these characters before I can shake out the story.
Got it. Well, after college, you worked as a newspaper reporter. I'm curious, what was it like writing your first few novels? Was it a process for you to write fiction versus journalism?
Well, it's funny. I kind of started off, and contrary to what some people say, they're two different worlds. They're two very different disciplines. For me, I'd always wanted to be a novelist. The idea that working in the newsroom was something that I felt would be great training ground as a novelist. I mean, going back to most, notably somebody like Ernest Hemingway, who spent a lot of time in the newsroom. As far as training, I thought that was going to be certainly a good place to start, and it was. It was the perfect place to start for a young writer. But the process, really began while I was a reporter. I spent my weekends, my days off, writing books and working on novels and stories. I mean, I say novels very loosely. I mean, they really were just, stories I was working on and practicing. As I didn't realize I was practicing, and I'd write a manuscript, and then, and then I'd write another one, and then I'd write a short story, and then I'd write another one. And finally, I guess it was in my mid-20s where I was working on something where I really felt like it was something that was good, and it was something that possibly could be published. And that was my book, Crossroad Blues, and that came out when I was 27. And that was the point where I felt like, oh, wow, I think I have something here. And this is, I finally figured out how to do this. But yeah, it was a long time of working in the newsroom, being a full-time newspaper reporter, but then spending my spare hours, working on books.
So are you working on a new novel now?
I am always working on a new novel. There is no rest. There's always a continuing story. I'm working on the next Quinn Coulson book right now, and I'm in it, but I'm going to have to put it down because I am, I start tomorrow. I'm on a national book tour, so I'm I hope to. My goal is when I get back in 2 weeks that I remember what the hell I'm writing.
Well, given your writing success thus far, what advice would you have for aspiring writers?
Well, I think it's fairly simple, and as simple as this may sound to some of your listeners, some people really do need to take this to heart. And the first thing is just read all the time. I mean, read everything you can get your hands on. Read all kinds of books, and then really focus on those kind of books the kind of books that you want to write, and focus on the authors that you really admire. And you spend a lot of time with those books. You have to have a love and an ingrained fascination and really an obsession with books on that standpoint. And then the second thing is write all the time. Practice your writing. And you have to understand one thing, which is not everything that's going to come from you, especially from the very beginning, is going to be, have any weight to it. Nobody sits down, no matter whether they're a artist or a musician or whatever, and comes out doing things, professionally, from the beginning. And you have to be willing to write. I heard John A. McDonald, the great crime writer, said one time, you really have to be writing 8 to 10 books before you can even figure ever getting published. And I think that's really true. You have to sit down and expect failure and expect, the first things that you're going to be writing are not going to be perfect. But you can't, I hear so many people that write like one manuscript and they're just exhausted. and they think that one manuscript that they've written is the end-all be-all, and that is the one thing. You really have to. That's only the beginning. I mean, when you're writing one manuscript, you have to be prepared to to start on the next one and the next one after that.
So you talked about reading. What books have you read recently, fiction or nonfiction, that you would recommend?
Right now, I'm sitting here drinking coffee, and I'm looking at my on the side of my table here. I really admire the writer C.J. Box, who writes crime novels set in modern-day Wyoming. Just fantastic books. I also just got an advance copy. I just finished reading Megan Abbott's new book, Give Me Your Hand, which is just a fantastic, very dark story set in the world of scientific research, and it's just an engaging, immersive novel. And then I'm always going back to, classics. I finished, went back and reread some Raymond Chandler recently. Another book that I think was fantastic, I read a book by a fellow Oxford, Mississippi writer here, a guy named William Boyle, and his book is just fantastic. And even though he lives here in the Deep South, he writes about Brooklyn, and he has a book called The Lonely Witness, and just wonderful stuff. So I always have a book in my hand when I'm not writing.
That's great. Well, if people are interested in learning more about you and The Sinners and your other novels, where can they find you online?
Well, they can easily find me at the very cleverly titled aceatkins.com. Like everybody else, I have a Facebook page. It's very active, where I discuss things with readers, and we talk about old movies and music and books and all the good stuff. And you can find me online there. And then, of course, I'm on Twitter as well.
Great. Well, again, we've been speaking with Ace Atkins. Ace's latest Quinn Coulson novel, The Sinners, is on sale now, so go grab a copy. And Ace, thanks for doing this interview.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you.